Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Arts, Parks, and Neighborhoods Committee. I want to welcome you all to this special meeting on Wednesday, November 30th, 2011. It is now 8 minutes after 3, and we're ready to begin. We'll be taking, as we always do, a general public comment at the conclusion of today's agenda items. But since there are a number of cards on all of the agenda items, I just wanted to lay out for you a little bit how today is going to go, because the focus of today's hearing will predominantly be on item 1, which is the elections issue. Items 2 through 5, further hearing on my motions on various reform areas. I'll be happy to hear from the public on those matters today, but I must tell you that it's only going to be me today. Both Mr. Wesson and Mr. Reyes will not be able to attend the hearing today, so those matters will be continued, and you will have another opportunity at the hearing to which they will be continued to be heard at that time as well. So if you don't choose to stay throughout that time to be heard on those matters, that's up to you. But the focus of today's hearing and the vast majority of the time that we're going to spend today is going to be on the elections matter number 1, and we won't be taking substantive action or hearing substantive reports on items 2 through 5. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and proceed to item number 1.
Thank you. Item number 1 is the City Attorney Report and Ordinance relative to amending Sections 20.36 and 22.816 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code relating to neighborhood council elections. We also have a report from the City Clerk regarding the draft ordinance amending the Los Angeles Administrative Code regarding neighborhood council elections.
All right, why don't we start by hearing from the City Attorney's Office about the proposed ordinance and its background and how we got here and what is before us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Council Member. Deputy City Attorney Darren Martinez. I can make this relatively brief. Going back perhaps to the 912 Commission, the 912 Commission had recommended during its recommendations that the elections be handed over from the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to the City Clerk. Those recommendations were adopted by City Council, so we had a system where the City Clerk would administer and conduct the Neighborhood Council elections in every even-numbered year. During this past summer, during the budget hearings with the City, there was not an appropriation made for neighborhood council elections, and our office was asked to prepare an ordinance that would basically postpone neighborhood council elections during the upcoming year, 2012, for an additional 2 years or until such time as the city clerk would be able to conduct further elections.
And I'm sorry, before you move forward, let me just interrupt you there for a little bit of clarification, because I think there has been a fair amount of public anxiety about that very point. My recollection of the history of this was that the decision was made because of the cost of the city clerk's election to eliminate the city clerk from the process for the upcoming 2012 cycle. There was going to continue to be dialogue about what would take the place of that 2012 election cycle, but that there wasn't a policy decision made that there were not, that, well, let me take it back. No policy decision was made by the council that existing neighborhood council board members' terms must be extended until 2014. The reason for this ordinance was because, from the city attorney's office's perspective, if there was no funding in 2012 and the city clerk is the only one under existing law to have authority to run the elections, that therefore then there must be an extension until 2014. Is that a roughly fair summary of where we were?
Yes, that's fairly accurate. We basically prepared this according to the instructions that we received. So
Because of the defunding of the clerk.
that is correct.
And so the fact that this ordinance has been prepared as such, I just want to make sure that the world out there who's paying close attention to this understands. This does not presuppose that neighborhood council members must continue in office through 2014. You did that because there wasn't another policy vehicle in place to take the place of the clerk's election, right?
Absolutely, yes. This doesn't presuppose that, because one of the options that neighborhood council still would retain, regardless of the city clerk's actions, is that they could conduct their own selection process. So this doesn't impact that selection process. And the authority for the selection process still lies with the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. That ability to work with neighborhood councils in the area of selections was never transferred from the department. Only the election authority is what we're dealing with in this ordinance and what we're talking about.
Right, and then by the same token, as we continue down this path and as we're trying to clean up what happens in the aftermath of defunding of the clerk, the council can still move forward with any number of other elections options, whether it could be self-administered elections, elections overseen by the department, or
Yes.
we're limited only by our imagination in terms of what we could replace this process with a
Exactly.
future policy that.
Yes, I would review this, or I would view this ordinance as well as just a vehicle by which we can begin the discussion on what to do with the neighborhood council elections. Obviously, then, after our office receives further input from council on what it would like to do and what ultimately the city decides with respect to elections, then we can go ahead and prepare an additional ordinance. But we were basically, following the directions we're given, and we view this, we've also received a number of concerns with respect to elections. So by no means does this indicate that this is a final ordinance, and I wouldn't regard this as a final ordinance. It's a vehicle by which we can begin the discussion on what really we should do with respect to elections. So the proposal as it exists is quite simply one that changes the existing ordinance so that the neighborhood council elections were postponed for 2 years and granted the city clerk that authority to extend terms. Again, it didn't impact the selection process in any way. So that's it, quite simply. So if there's one other point. The proposed ordinance also eliminated several obsolete provisions. So if you compared this to the language that exists currently in the ordinance, you'll notice that language that dealt with elections that were conducted in 2010, for example, are no longer included with that ordinance. And again, that's simply because it's now obsolete. Those elections having occurred, there's no longer any need for that language to continue in this ordinance.
Okay, great. So if you could summarize again, how would this, how, if at all, would this ordinance, as it currently stands, impact the council's ability to transfer authority for elections to Dunn?
Well, we would have to actually do another amended ordinance, because we would have to end up repealing those ordinances now that grant that authority to the city clerk, and we'd have to amend the ordinances to then indicate that that departmental authority now exists under the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. So it would be a slightly different ordinance than that would come forward if that were the result that were to be obtained.
Okay. And I know that there's still pending kind of an after-action report, for lack of a better word, the analysis that the clerk has been preparing on election results and election options, which is not yet ready to be brought back to this committee. But that creates challenges for us in taking advantage of the information to be derived there in moving forward with the policy. If we were to, this ordinance could be, if it were the will of the council to go in a particular different policy direction, either based on those recommendations of the clerk or otherwise, would we be able to amend this ordinance before it's approved in final form by council in order to do so?
Well,
Would that be a vehicle by which
we would have to obtain the direction from city council to then amend those ordinances, because it would be, you know, a substantially different ordinance than the one that's before you right now.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with process here because timing matters, and I understand that this is a significant amount of work on the part of the city attorney's office, and sometimes that takes a considerable amount of time to do. If this committee were to approve an amended ordinance, let's say, approve this ordinance with committee recommendations for amendment, is that something that you could then prepare to be put before council?
I would be happy to work with your office in doing that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would try my best to be able to accomplish that with you.
Okay, thank you. And we are joined by our clerk, Ms. Lagme, if you'd like to provide comment on the proposed ordinance, if you wish, but more critically to me at the moment, I know that you're working on your report about
the survey, yes.
About results, about the input that you've gotten, and prospective options. What do you expect at this point will be the timing on when that will be ready to be brought to the committee?
The survey has been disseminated. 5 neighborhood council boards have returned the results, and 15 individual stakeholders. We put a deadline of January 6th on that. Upon the return, give us a couple, 3 weeks to digest the results and put it in manageable form. So we would anticipate coming back with the results of the survey in February. But why I approach the table is just on the particular point that we are hoping that an ordinance can go to council in the near future that at least absolves the clerk of having to do the elections in 2012, because I would hate for the end of the fiscal year to come and we end up being in violation of the ad code, because we are, until the law changes, the law obligates us to run that election. So it's sort of a square peg, round hole kind of thing. I just wanted to mention that.
I understand, and that complicates the timing issues that we're talking about.
Precisely.
Laying the budget year on top of everything else, of course, makes it even more complicated. So that's why I am pursuing this area of interest to possibly amend the ordinance with instructions from this committee so that we can expedite that process and get an ordinance before the council in time to do that.
And then basically the written report that I provided to your committee basically summarizes the fact that the city clerk was not funded for NC elections in 2012. The adopted budget did instruct the city attorney to draft an ordinance to postpone NC elections as administered by the clerk for 2 years to the year 2014, and then authorizes the clerk to direct that terms of NC board members be extended to calendar year 2014. And I have subsequently understood from the city attorney that that language was meant to be permissive and discretionary, not obligatory. So we would work on a policy, taking into account if the neighborhood council board actually requested for the terms to be extended, but it is not something that has to happen. So it is permissive and not obligatory.
And And I appreciate that clarification. I think that's going to put many people's minds at ease as well, because I think for many neighborhood councils, the idea of being compelled to serve for an additional 2 years was not only worrisome but offensive. That that the city was somehow going to require that they stay on the job for an additional 2 years. And then the flip side of that is that for those stakeholders who may think that the current board is not adequately representing them, they also have a concern about having extended terms, which kind of subverts the whole idea of grassroots democracy. So I understand the mechanics of this and why this played out the way that it does. I appreciate that clarification about the permissive nature of extending the terms, because I think that is more consistent with what I had understood to be the existing law, which does allow neighborhood councils to do a selection process if they wish, even now, without additional changes. But I do think it's important to note that last component of what we're talking about, the extension of individual board members' terms, that is an indirect result of the funding issues. It's not anything that this committee or the council decided as a policy issue. It's the result of the budgetary issue. And so I want to make sure everybody knows that that is not a settled question by any means, and I personally would not support that kind of an extension. I think we need to find a resolution that's going to apply citywide, that is going to provide for democracy to continue to function in 2012. So stay tuned. That last part of how we do that is still to be done. But I guess since Mr. Kim is here, Mr. Kim, did you want to provide any comment on where we are with elections here or on the ordinance before we begin with public comment on it?
Just briefly, Bongwan Kim, General Manager for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, and I concur with your position that elections is a critical component to the neighborhood council system, and that some opportunity be provided for neighborhood councils to, for their communities to decide who should represent them on the neighborhood council. Going back a few years, when the city clerk took on the elections, it was transferring that responsibility from the department to the city clerk is something I supported. When I was on the review commission, it really didn't make sense from an outsider's perspective why the department should be administering elections when you have a very professional, capable staff of holding elections. And the idea of doing outreach to all the households in the city was a great opportunity to increase the visibility of the neighborhood council system. However, the fiscal crisis is coloring many things about the city's ability to provide services, and this is just one of them. I understand that there is some support for neighborhood councils for the department to take back elections, and I would support that. Elections are not easy to conduct. It's a fairly complex project. I have a lot of respect for the staff at the city clerk for doing what they did, and being able to run some 90 neighborhood council elections over a 3-month period was no easy feat. Should the council request that the department take on elections, we would need some additional resources, and I think that will be the challenge, given that the current fiscal crisis is, we're still not out of the woods. But I would just comment that we have had a few meetings with the elections task force, and we did come up with a variety of options that really recognize that the city's fiscal crisis demanded that we provide or we develop an election system that is very streamlined as possible, that minimizes costs, and but yet is done in a way that that holds up to public integrity. So I think that's going to be the challenge. Whether we are going to include a budget request for elections in the mayor's budget. We have not had enough time to fully engage with the elections task force on what exactly the components of that will be, but the mayor's office has requested that we put together a budget package that would include elections, and we're doing so as we speak. And that will be fully vetted out. I think it'll become more substantive after we engage with the elections task force to kind of fill in more details about exactly what we could offer. But basically, we are looking at a public selection process. You know, before the elections were held, the selection option was always in the ordinance, but it's not something that we really promoted and put out there. But with the fiscal crisis, for some neighborhood councils, it's a viable option, but it still can get tricky in contentious elections, where it has a high voter turnout, and there still are quite a bit of human resource requirements should that be offered citywide. Of course, the election option should be available, and some members of the elections task force felt that neighborhood councils should be able to opt out of this upcoming election, and I think that's an issue that we probably need to have more vetting of, but those are the three options that have been discussed.
And as with so many issues that involve neighborhood councils, the matter is further complicated by the wide range of needs in our different communities. And there's, with all of the, is it 95 or
95?
95 is the current number of neighborhood councils that we have. There's a wide range of participation levels. There's a wide range of contentiousness in the selection process, and so different systems may seem to work better for one neighborhood council as opposed to the other. And with a clerk system, of course, we have the Cadillac. We have the best, most professional kind of election that could be run, and I think almost uniformly. Of course, everything has criticism.
I kind of think of myself as a Japanese-made car.
Well, what, Alexis? Would Alexis be better? It's a global economy now. Even Cadillacs have components from other places. But it's the finest, most...
It wouldn't be a Hyundai either.
I'm not going to go further down this metaphor, but the truth is, this is a very high grade of election service, and in some places that makes perfect sense, and in some places I think the idea of the significance that a clerk's participation in the election brings is important. And it conveys to the public that, yes, we take our neighborhood council movement so seriously that this is how we administer our elections, and it makes the neighborhood councils feel more a part of the electoral governance of this city. On the other hand, there are other places where we have more candidates than voters sometimes, or more offices than voters, I guess I should say. And in those cases, it seems kind of redundant to have such a high level of service. So that's the challenge that we have in terms of both the fiscal aspect of it and also figuring out what the right policy direction to take in that gives neighborhood councils the respect that they earn, treats them with a level of sophistication that is justified by their appropriate role in government, and yet isn't unduly complicated so as to dissuade participation and limit our ability to do outreach. So it's not a simple issue by any means, but I do want to say, in addition to being the gold standard, if you will, Ms. Lagman, in elections, I also want to really say how much I appreciate all the great work you've done outside of the election arena in analyzing this issue, and your office has been, I think, very, very helpful for this committee and for the public, I think, in analyzing what our range of options are, and doing it in a way that, will help us to achieve a level of fairness and an appropriate election process. So I do want to thank you very much for all the work that you've done, and also for trying to figure out a way to make this work when it's neighborhood councils are not a natural fit with what you do, and yet you've worked magic, I think, in trying to make it work. And so I want to say how much I appreciate both the election process and also all the participation in the policy making that you've done on this as well. And Mr. Kim as well, I appreciate very much that the department has engaged in this, has sought input, and is willing to step up now, if that's the course that we end up going, to try to take over some measure of that responsibility as well. Ms. Lagman, you talked a little bit about the timing of the survey and so on. Can you talk a little bit more? I put the cart before the horse a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about what you've been doing, what that survey has been, what outreach you've done, what the goal of it is that we're trying to achieve with that, and then that will help put a little bit more context into where we are, I think.
Okay. One point that I wanted to make is I think we need to make a bifurcation between whether or not there should be neighborhood council elections in 2012 versus the question of neighborhood council elections in 2014 and thereafter. If on the question whether or not there should be neighborhood council elections in 2012, which is literally a month away, if the council decides to proceed with neighborhood council elections in 2012, and then an ordinance needs to be enacted that removes clerk from that responsibility. And also to appoint a different administrator. If the council decides, however, that neighborhood council elections should not proceed in 2012, then we only need the ordinance that absolves the clerk of performing them in 2012. Going on to 2014, the ordinance as drafted by the city attorney per the council's instruction postpones the elections from 2012 to 2014, but then the authority comes back to the clerk. If the council decides to appoint a different election administrator for neighborhood council elections starting in 2014 thereafter, a new ordinance would have to be enacted. So again, I just am making a distinction between 2012 and 2014. As far as the progress on the surveys, I think I would like Isaias to come up and tell you a little bit about the outreach that we've been doing. Very low. Easy.
To the punch.
The outreach we've been doing, the community meetings that we've been attending, and materials that have been made available. So, Easy, please go ahead.
Isaias Cantu, Senior Project Coordinator for the Election Division. In regards to the study, we've performed extensive outreach in trying to have people participate in the study, understand the steps that we would take, understand each different step where they can participate and provide feedback, and ultimately the deadline of when they have to provide that survey back to us so that we can compile a report and present that to committee and city council. Back in August of 2010 or 2011, we actually started participating by attending all the NC Alliances meeting, explaining to them that we'd be performing a study, why we were performing a study, what the goal of it was, and how they can participate. In September, we held 4 regional meetings across the city of Los Angeles where we explained the process, explained the study, and explained the fact that we would be holding educational workshops, which occurred in October. These educational workshops went through the pros and cons to each one of the different election alternatives that had been provided to the NC Election Task Force as part of our feedback meetings to the follow-up to the 2010 elections. And we provide them pros, cons, and potential costs that would be involved in each one of the different alternatives. Since then, we have distributed the survey on October 28th. On that date, we sent an email to all of our listserv, which includes pretty much every last board member that was elected in 2010. We followed that up with a phone bank to all presidents and secretaries, explaining to them the purpose for the email, the purpose for the survey, and the deadline. We are currently conducting a follow-up reminder email and phone bank to all NC presidents and all secretaries, asking them to place us on their agendas for December if they haven't already placed us in November. We will be following up with another email and another phone bank 2 weeks prior to the deadline of January 6th, and a final one on the deadline of January 6th to notify people and all NCs that we're awaiting their surveys, and to ask whether they need an additional amount of time to be able to respond. So that's the feedback that we've been, actually the outreach that we've been performing.
Okay.
It's very important to note that we feel very strongly in the integrity and the importance of the survey as a measuring instrument. So much of what's happened up to now has been some people say this, some people say that, some people feel this, some people feel that. This is going to be our conclusive tool that will actually take an accounting of how many people feel what way, how they want the future neighborhood council elections to be held, and who they want to administer them. So we hope to get the results to you, as I said, in February, which timing-wise is not incompatible with the budget process that will be proceeding to Budget Committee and the full council in March and May of this year, of next year.
And again, the deadline for response is January 6th?
Correct.
January 6th. So I would urge all of the neighborhood council board members who are here, if you haven't already, please let your neighborhood councils know. January 6th, it's really important to get your input before then. And I see Jeremy's in the back, we will also get the word out. And Mr. Kim, if we can make another effort to make sure everyone is aware of this deadline so that we get the most comprehensive body of information that we can, that would be a great help. Okay. Okay, thank you all very much. I think what I'd like to do now is go to public comment on item number 1, and we have a lot of cards, so all right, here's what I think I'm going to have to do, folks, and I'm sorry about this. We've got a lot of cards on this matter and on all the other matters. And I again want to reiterate that because there will not be a final action on any of these matters today, we will not be closing public comment today on any of these items. This will not be your last opportunity to comment on any of these items. So what I'd like to do is go with 2 minutes apiece on this item, but we're only going to have time for 1 minute apiece on the other items, just because we're not even going to hear those substantively, and we just won't have time in the rest of the day to get it done otherwise. So we'll start with 2 minutes apiece on elections on item 1, and our first speaker will be Dr. Tom Williams, followed by Charles Lindenblatt. Dr. Williams.
Dr. Tom Williams, LA 32 Neighborhood Council Board Member. We had a total failure with the city clerk the last elections that they held, so we're more than happy to not have the city clerk hold the 2012 elections, maybe not even the 2014 or any others. We have a selection process. We've used it already in the last year. We're going to be using it hopefully this month, maybe next month, and the month after. It works. So if you want to do something constructive, change the bylaws to support a better process of selections, appointments, and maybe elections with a small e, because we are grassroots. We can do it better. Many of the neighborhood councils have done it better than the city clerk. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Charles Lindenblatt, followed by Ida Talela.
Yes, thank you very much, Councilman. My name is Charles Lindenblatt. I'm with the Mid-City West Community Council. I was the election committee chair for 2008 and 2010, but in this case I'm speaking only for myself. The previous speaker indicated that he found that there was a failure there with the city clerk. Well, I take the opposite point of view. I think that the city clerk did a good job in that case, that there were definitely some issues that we had there, but I feel strongly that, it's mend it, don't end it. There were some issues there, but I feel that they can be fixed, and that it's important to have that independent voice administrator of our elections, because I'm personally against the selection process because, for one thing, it doesn't work with all boards. I'm on a board with 45 members. We had about 62 candidates in our last election. A selection process and logistically and just in terms of we have a kind of a divided board, and we need somebody from the outside to run it, as happened the last time. We're having all sorts of issues now. The new chair of our election committee is a registered lobbyist with the city, so we have issues, and it would be better for us to have an outside the city clerk continue with the process, if at all possible. So I would urge that to continue. But that's not possible, that something workable be developed for boards that are divisive and do have a lot of issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Ida Tawala, and I'm a stakeholder in the Greater Echo Park Coalition Neighborhood Council, and I did once before serve on the neighborhood council itself. I was in the election run by the city clerk, and however, shortly afterwards, my right to vote on agenda items was removed by the president and the CIO on a dubious charge that I had not signed the code of conduct. I had taken the test that the city attorney's office gave. There was no recourse. This was not brought before the board, nor was a letter sent to me, but it was done. Basically, what you have here is a neighborhood council system that has devolved into a private club operation, isolated and at odds with community. That the city clerk's office is only speaking to these neighborhood councils is an act of separating information to stakeholders. And that is wrong, because neighborhood council systems are supposed to help the community. I think that option to reach out into all parts of the community and be it part of the action has to happen. These private clubs need to be shut down. The word has to get out to community. You have the money for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lisa Sarkin, followed by Didi Audette.
Lisa Sarkin, representing the Studio City Neighborhood Council. We have already sent in our survey, and we are in favor of independent election administrators. But something I don't understand about the city clerk's request. If we're not going to have a report on the survey until February, then how can they be absolved from having the election before those surveys are put together and a report is issued? That's questionable to me. I don't think that they can possibly be absolved for that. we feel that the elections are of utmost, should be handled in the same way they have been, an open election where people are voting, where you go to a poll and you vote. It's not the same as standing around in a town hall meeting. It doesn't mean as much. It's 10-plus years of the neighborhood councils, and to take away the election process and the process that is the city council, the mayor, and everybody else is elected is just not right. And I find it offensive that in the report it says that drawing a name out of a hat is just as good as having an election that is private, that you are in a booth, and it's just the American way. And that is what our neighborhood council would like to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Dee Audette, followed by Judy Price.
All right. Good afternoon. I have two cards in, one for Elizabeth Wright, and I'm going to read the item from that Elizabeth wished to have me speak for her. The principle of holding elections is sacred to democracy. To prohibit an election in 2012 flies in the face of the democratic principles the stakeholders have every right to expect. That was for Elizabeth Wright. Now, for Dee Audette, I'm very disappointed that two council members were not interested enough, in my opinion, to be present. Next, the way that the city council has handled elections for neighborhood councils has been from the beginning an error, and what has been proposed by the city attorney compounds the error. Number one, in my district, there was no parking at the precinct. Now, even though a place has a ramp, that doesn't help if you live 2 miles from the precinct. Next, the city clerk is supposed to provide a precinct for every 1,250 voters. In the case of Venice, I don't believe that was met. So there are many things here. This whole business of voting was approached inappropriately, and I have every hope that you're going to improve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Judy Price, followed by Leonard Schaefer.
Good afternoon. I'm Judy Price. I'm with the Greater Valley Glen Council. I do have issues with the ordinance. I agree with you, Paul, in terms of your objections to it. However, I also think that the distinction between election and selection should be made. I know that our neighborhood council does not want a selection process. That's an open voting. They prefer to go back to the election process done with an election, a standard election. If the ordinance is changed, it's fine, I think, to take the city clerk out of it this year and make it for 2014. But I would urge that the language in item 3 that says that they would extend the terms for an additional 2 years, that's not what we want. I mean, I think most neighborhood councils want the ability to opt in or opt out. I mean, I don't think everybody should have to follow the same guideline. If some people want to wait to 2014, that's fine. But for many of us, we don't. We'd like the old-fashioned election process. In terms of budget, I do think that it's perfectly fine to put the responsibility, or at least part of it, back on the neighborhood councils. Have the neighborhood, we do get money. And a lot of that money is, originally was for elections as well, for outreach and elections. And I think that to put that burden on us would be better than postponing the elections to 2014. I know for my neighborhood council, we're going to lose a lot of the board members, because many of them have been there, beyond 2 years already. I mean, speaking for myself, I don't know if I can hang in till 2014. So that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
You're not going anywhere, Judy.
I'm not going anywhere.
You're not going anywhere.
Oh,
You're not going
you have no idea.
All right, thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Lynn Schaefer, followed by Jill Banks-Barad.
Yes, Councilman Krikorian, good afternoon. I'm pleased to inform this committee, to inform you that the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners did pass a motion, which you should receive a letter on, supporting the fact that, one, requesting that the City Council not postpone elections, and secondly, that the City Council not grant the authority to the clerk to extend board member terms. One of the reasons I introduced that was, although the language appears to be permissive, as our city clerk stated, it is permissive on the part of the city clerk only. It is not permissive on the part of the neighborhood councils. In other words, the city clerk could do it with or without the agreement of the neighborhood councils. And further, the question of whether it would affect the selection process if, in fact, the city clerk opted to use that option.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next speaker is Jill Banks-Barad, followed by Linda Lux.
Good afternoon. I'm Jill Banks-Barad, and I'm here representing the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils. And I first want to thank Councilman Krikorian for bringing this issue out in the public so that we can give our opinions on this. It's very important, and you're right, there's been a lot of public anxiety about this. The Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils passed unanimously a motion saying that councils should have the option to either have an election, a selection, or to opt out for 2012 and 2014. And we don't feel that it's right that one method be imposed on everyone else. I noticed when the city attorney was speaking, he only talked about selection. Many of us have in our bylaws and in our election procedures elections, and we do not feel that our community, it's not the right community, it's not the right method to have a selection. And I don't think that this should be imposed on everyone. A selection, as it's been described to me, is more of a town hall. And we don't, if someone wants to do that in another neighborhood council, that's fine. But I don't think that should be imposed on everyone. Also, what we would like to see is getting back to the election administrator and being overseen by Dunn. The other thing is make use of volunteers. That will cut back on the costs. And you know, when the city clerk this last time said, we're going to have volunteers and you're going to go to neighboring neighborhood councils and help, and we all said fine, and then none of us were called to work those council elections. And many of us in the past have helped. I know I've conducted 2 elections with other neighborhood councils. Many of us have helped, and we're here to help again. Thank you very much.
If I can just ask you one question on the opt-out part of that. Did Vank discuss how you address a situation where a board of a neighborhood council might be perfectly content to stay on, but there may be stakeholder opposition to that? How do you deal with a situation where a board itself might just choose to stay in power, and that might not be the will of the stakeholders?
Yes, and I think that's a problem. I know the councils that I know of who have opted to opt out were just elected and felt it was too soon to have another election. I think the key here is to inform your community. Let them know by email blasts or some kind of outreach that what the situation is. Give them some background. Tell them it's a budgetary crisis kind of situation. And I think in some cases, I know in our community, we're going to ask our stakeholders what they would like. Explain it to them and say, what do you think? And in other words, bring them into the process, because we certainly don't want anyone to think it's a power grab or that we're thwarting democracy.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Jill. Our next speaker is Commissioner Linda Lux, followed by Mark Mosseri.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Happy to be here. Linda Lux. I'm president of the Venice Neighborhood Council and also serve on the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. I just wanted to start off by saying I think the decision not to fund the city clerk this year was penny wise and pound foolish. because we're going through months and months of angst and uncertainty about what's going to happen, and I don't know when it's going to be resolved. And I think a cost analysis of what it's ultimately going to cost and what it would have cost might not pan out. The Venice Neighborhood Council does not want the elections to be postponed. We do selection as people resign, and we select the new members. However, if there's a general selection, it really is insular. It's not really fair to the population at large. In a community like Venice, we have well over 1,000 voters. We couldn't use any other form but an election. We could go back. I just love the fact that the city clerk took us all to another level of maturity, and I wish the city clerk would continue doing the elections, because it allowed us to be in the business of recruiting candidates and having good elections that weren't challenged. So, but that being said, one way or the other, we want elections, and town hall situation wouldn't work for us. As Commissioner Schaefer's reported, the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners is also on record now as opposing canceling the elections in 212. But beware, please, of the insular nature of people keeping power for whatever reason that looks bad to the community not to have elections, and selections or acclamation also could look really bad because you could stack it with your own friends, etc. Elections are the only fair way to improve democracy, and also what's it going to cost to the neighborhood councils? Nobody's really saying that. What is it going to cost us? Is it going to cost us $20,000? I want to know what it's going to cost us. And the integrity of the elections is also important. City clerk allows that and makes sure that happens. The IEDs, or the independent election administrators, IEAs, also ensured that, although not as a high caliber. So keep that in mind about the integrity and the cost for us.
Thank you. Our next speaker is it Mark Mocheri or Moseri?
Depends what part of the world you're in. It's Moseri here.
Followed by Bob Gelfin.
Okay. I'm going to try not to go over points that other people have said. As you've stated, and you seem to have a pretty good grasp of the complexities of this, my first point is the city attorney's memo seems like a blueprint on how to go about canceling an election, when I think the discussion is really about how do we offer viable alternatives to deal with the budget crisis that we have. There are solutions. What I want to make really clear to you and the city council is one size does not fit all. I think you've heard that. I think a neighborhood council that turns out 12 voters, is a lot different than a neighborhood council that turns out 1,200. We need the city clerk. Like other people have said, the city clerk gives us legitimacy. They have the core competencies, the experience, and the knowledge on how to run elections. Is it perfect? No. But is it getting better? Yes. And having them out there and doing this for us is something that we at the Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council truly appreciate. Finally, after stating that the city clerk has 2 election cycles, I just have a last thought, and my last thought is that there was a reason why the elections were turned over to the city clerk. In 2006, a very large body spent a long amount of time studying them and said, listen, we need to put this into a body that is arbitrary, completely objective, and completely impartial. I don't think you get that anywhere else. And like you said, there are a lot of boards that may be out there that really don't want an election, but that may not be what the stakeholders want. And the elections are the only way you're going to get there. I think there's a hybrid solution. I think the hybrid solution is, and my board feels, that the city clerk has some sort of oversight, as insofar as the forms, the process, the procedure, and splits the difference with the neighborhood councils. Because from the budget documents that they submitted in the post-election, a majority of the costs come from the poll administration. Well, I can see how someone says, look, when you get a poll turnout of 12 people, this isn't working, and it's a waste of money. That's a very fair analysis. A hybrid might solve that problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Robert Gelfin, followed by Glenn Bailey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Councilman. I'll try to talk real quick, and I'm going to start out with a landslide that we had a week and a half ago that you've probably seen on television, which took down an area approximately the size of a major aircraft carrier, tens of thousands of tons, and has not put anybody out of work or out of home.
I saw it in person, in fact.
Yes, as did I. And I want to point out simply an article that I wrote for City Watch that I gave to your assistant there, pointing out that the neighborhood council, in fact, is the organization that acted as the grown-ups in this case. We were lucky enough to have help from numerous members of the state legislature and so on. But the point was that I think what we've established is that we have become the go-to place, the essentially nucleation crystal for what happens when we actually have to deal with things like natural disasters, train wrecks, and political discussions, and we have to be representative because we're now facing what is going to be a lot of competing interests about who wants to rebuild a road through what is a nature preserve and so on. So I think that we need a real paradigm shift, which is to recognize that neighborhood councils are in fact grown-ups, that we're not all a bunch of babies and crybabies. And I come to these meetings, I've been to these subcommittee meetings for years, and what I hear is the people complaining about why they lost an election or why they have too many people on the board and therefore they can't hold an election. I'm going to try and spend 20 seconds going through what the election task force has done recently. The election task force has met several times, come up with some common sense suggestions like, yes, let's go back to something like the independent election administrator. And more to the point, I'd like to point out that the election task force agreed entirely and essentially unanimously with the bank resolution. Neighborhood councils have a right to have elections. They should be allowed to hold them. We have some, yes, we ask me about the opt-out if you want, like you asked my colleague. We've recently been approached by the League of Women Voters. We think that that's a possibility to get volunteer poll watchers. That will be a big help in solving all these after-the-fact complaints and challenges. We propose to have a system fully in place to deal with election challenges, to hear them, and to solve the problems.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Glenn Bailey, followed by Lee Wallach.
Good afternoon, Councilman Krikorian. I have served on neighborhood council for 8 years. We were one of the group of 22 that the city clerk did in their initial election experience in 2008, and so we've had a double experience with them. I have been rather public as a critic of the city clerk, but it's not that they're not competent running elections. It's just that they are difficult. The neighborhood councils are used to being more flexible, and I can go over a variety of issues. I don't have time to do that, but just so you know, I tried my best to participate as a volunteer poll worker. I signed up for Region A in the Valley and wasn't set up. There were no volunteer poll workers, so they didn't get it organized in time. I did end up serving in Region C for Greater Toluca Lake as a volunteer poll worker. I also served as a election challenge panel board member with one of the Bonk commissioners and other neighborhood council board members. Our unanimous decision was unilaterally overturned by city clerk. And the rules were rewritten after the fact. So that's what I'm talking about, the complaints about the process. But I do agree that they have the credibility, and I hope that they're willing to fix those types of problems. I want to specifically point out, though, this budget process that brought us to here today was done really not in secret, but it was off the radar for neighborhood councils. It was done in budget and finance, where they put in this stipulation to have the city attorney prepare this ordinance. This is the first public airing, really, that we've had on this. Secondly, on Section 20.36, subsection 3, that's referencing the city clerk, I think that this needs to be tightened up with better language that requires a vote of the neighborhood council, possibly even of the stakeholders, as many of us have in our bylaws. When we fill vacancies and we have we have multiple applicants for a vacancy on our board, it then has to go to all the stakeholders who attend the board meeting. There's a vote at the meeting, and it's noticed. I would suggest that we improve the language, at least in that paragraph. I know my time's up. I do support the bank position and believe that it's wrong to cancel the elections unilaterally without us providing an opportunity to flexibility and individual decision by the neighborhood councils to proceed. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Our next speaker is Lee Wallach, followed by Ivan Spiegel.
Thank you, Councilman. As a stakeholder and not a member of the neighborhood council, many of the folks in my community feel very strongly that we do need elections in 2012. No extension of terms, no selection process, that we must keep this independent and professional. No opting out, no reduction, and really the stakeholders' rights, which is key here and should be, the most important thing that we're looking at here. We need to give those community members a chance to get out there. I think that there's a system-wide approach that can meet the needs of most of the stakeholders, and again, that's the important key. While it may work better for some, work worse for others, I think we can have a system-wide approach that works. I think we do need to keep the current system and not throw the baby out with the bathwater, or as far as the election process is concerned. I think the office has done a wonderful job. Is there always room for improvement? Of course. So let's work on improving it rather than just throwing it out and doing something else. I think it's important that they're there and that it's independent because there's pressure and abuse that happens out there. Many NCs have significant participation. Many do not, and some of their members are elected by the other members of the council. We really have to be careful out there and be credible. It's also time to look at what the neighborhood councils are doing. It's that time to really look into how they're functioning and how they're organized, their bylaws, their election process. Let's look at it from a systematic approach. And last but not least, I think it's critical that your colleagues, especially some of the ones that aren't here, get out there and bring people to the process, their HOAs and all their other stakeholders that they have access to. So please let your colleagues know that they need to get that word out.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ivan Spiegel, followed by Jose Sigala. And if anyone else would like to comment on this matter, please fill out a card and bring it forward. Otherwise, after Mr. Sigala, we'll be moving on. Mr. Spiegel.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Ivan Spiegel. I'm the parliamentarian for the Venice Neighborhood Council. And I also work for the city clerk and the county registrar as a poll inspector. So I have a lot of experience running elections. Our experience with the city clerk was wonderful. If it weren't for dollar figures that we were going to have to pay for, I'd be standing here with a big give us back the city clerk sign. However, if we do have to pay for it, now we have a problem because the figures they gave us, plus adding outreach onto it, would come out to more than half of our budget, and that's absurd. I have a problem with the survey they sent out, and I heard the clerk say today that's going to be really, the results of that is what we're going to run with. There are no dollar figures on the survey. They said, well, which method would you like? And they listed the methods. Nothing about how much each of these are going to cost. If somebody says, well, we're going to give you a car, you have a choice between a Lamborghini and a Honda, I'd take the Lamborghini. Oops, wait, we have to pay for it. Okay, I better take the Honda because I can't afford it. So the results of this survey are going to be skewed because people don't understand how much each of these things are going to cost. It's very important to maintain the integrity of elections. No matter what methods you take, there must be an independent third party to verify these elections and make sure they're done fairly. Last thing, there's a history in the United States of the right to vote. People fought for it, people died for it, it was part of the American Revolution. Right after the Civil War, blacks were given the right to vote, or minorities. Women fought for the right to vote, and now the city council is saying, well, we don't have the money, we're just going to take away your right to vote. This is unacceptable in this country. This is a democracy. You do not cancel or take away elections in a democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. And although comment is not the time for dialogue, I will just note that, again, as I mentioned before, this is not something that the council has done to dispense with elections. The question before us is how are elections going to be administered, and that not whether or not there will be elections. So, Mr. Sigala.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. First of all, I just wanted to start off that our Greater Echo Park Collegiate Neighborhood Council, which I'm the president of, was one of the 22 initial neighborhood councils who had elections in 2008. And given all the LA Times, LA Weekly articles during that process, it was a good turnout. It was a good election. It allowed us to reach out to individuals and get them involved with the neighborhood council. And so we've had two good experiences with the city clerk. However, there's been some concerns that I've raised to them in the past, including the elimination of the vote by mail in the 2010 election and other types of things that I thought curtailed the opportunity for people to participate. But now, given what you have before you, what I'm suggesting, and our neighborhood council will weigh in before the January 6th deadline to the city clerk in terms of what we think as a body. But my personal thoughts are that I share the same situation with a lot of the other speakers, that we should have a process that provides for integrity, for the sense of there being fairness and being a situation where people can feel good about their election. And so that's the one thing that's very important. Also share a concern with the cost, not understanding exactly what the cost will be. I just recently got elected to be the vice chair of the budget advocates for this year, and so we'll be looking at some of the issues related to the city departments. However, we already know that there's a 6 to 12% cut across the board that's going to be happening with departments. Is that going to affect neighborhood councils? And so what do we do with the funds that we use to enhance city services? I agree with the fact that the selection process is a little troubling in terms of how that may operate. Personally, I think an election is important. I've had the chance to run 3 times and be elected 3 times. And so it's something that we look forward to in terms of allowing us to share what neighborhood councils are all about with our neighbors. So at the end of the day, I would say that I would support having the 2012 election, but concerned with the cost and the integrity of those elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Well, thank you all very, very much, and I want to thank the City Attorney's Office for bringing this forward as well. There are, I'm a lawyer too, so I get that there's at least, when the City Attorney's Office was given the task of figuring out how to address the ramifications of defunding the clerk for 2012, there are a number of issues that come out of that. That first question, number one, whether the clerk will do elections in 2012. Number two, if not the clerk, then whom? And number three, what do you do with neighborhood council board members in the meantime? And I think the ordinance attempted to deal with number one and number three, not with number two, because they haven't been instructed about number two. We still have some more thinking to do about number two, for sure. But I think that the issue of extending, again, I'm going to say this for my own, on my own behalf, the idea of a forcible extension of board member terms until 2014 is not going to be acceptable to me. So we're going to figure out a solution that is going to involve administering elections, that is not going to encompass extension of board member terms through 2014. And so I want to continue to work on this. I'd like to continue this matter at least until our next regularly scheduled meeting next week. We're scheduled for next week, same time, same place, right? What's the date of the next meeting?
The 14th, December 14th.
Our next meeting is December 14th? Okay. Yeah. That worked. Yeah. Yeah, so, I'm sorry, Ms. Sarkin is trying to...
It's the day of your party.
It's the day of my party?
Should we have it at your party?
Okay, well... Okay, we'll work those issues out. So, do you have it? Okay. Apparently, some issues still to be worked out in terms of the timing. At our next meeting of this committee, whenever that may turn out to be, we'll have a continued discussion on this, and of course, you will all be informed of that through our normal notification process. So, thank you all for your valuable input on item number 1. That brings us to the remaining items, and again, I'm just going to let everybody know we're not going to be hearing any substantive reports on any of these 4 remaining items. We're just going to bring them up. If you want to provide comment, that's fine, but we're going to be bringing those back and continuing each of these matters as well. So, Mr. Powell, number 2.
Item number 2 is a Department of Neighborhood Empowerment report in response to motion Krikorian Smith relative to the Neighborhood Council System Training Program. Item number 3.
Well, let's just take them one at a time if we can, if we have cards underneath.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 2, the motion regarding training. Our first speaker is Dr. Williams, followed by Ida Talala. And I'm sorry, Dr. Williams, again, remember, we're going to, for these items, we're just going to have 1 minute.
Just 5?
If you would like to do that?
That's probably the easiest way. Okay.
In that case, Dr. Williams, Mr. Powell, if you would just go ahead and introduce each of the items, and then for those speakers who want to speak on multiple items, we'll just run them all together, if you'd like.
Yes, sir. Item number 3 is a Dunn report in response to motion Krikorian Smith relative to the Neighborhood Council System Grievance System and associated policies and process. Item number 4 is a Dunn report in response to motion Krikorian Koretz relative to a Neighborhood Council Regional Governance System. Item number 5 is a Dunn report in response to a motion of Krikorian Smith relative to the Neighborhood Council System Funding Program and related matters.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Williams?
Okay. Dr. Tom Williams, LA 32 Neighborhood Council Board Member. Whole bunch of different things, but it all comes down basically, this is a grassroots organization. It should be based upon the grassroots, not based upon who's the lawn keeper at the time, how much fertilizer the lawn gets, or anything like that. So, what do the people have? We have 95 neighborhood councils, all of them with different expertise, but we have no means of getting that expertise to those that need it. There's some attempts right now, the C2C, C4C, whatever it's going to be. But training should be done based upon knowing what's available. We have a lot of things available. We have a lot of people that are available. Peer grievance panel. What does that mean? Somebody has to choose amongst 1,800 or so people as to who's going to be a peer. Who's going to choose that? Dunn? Bonk? We don't know. So revise the grievance procedure in bylaws. Give it available to everybody. But don't impose it either by Bonk or by Dunn, because it won't work, because people will figure out some way of getting around it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. All right. Our next speaker is Ida Talala, and I think you had
Thank you very
cards
much.
on multiple matters as well, did you?
Yes, I'll wrap it up and
You can have more than the 1 minute if you'd
That's
like.
okay. Thank you very much. My name is Ida Talala, and I'm in the Greater Echo Park Elation Neighborhood Council District. I am very concerned with the neighborhood council system, the changes that have taken place, the changes that are being proposed. These are the changes that have not been really vetted through the stakeholders. And I think it's time that the neighborhood council system gets a review process, an audit of some sorts, so that it's like the Neighborhood Council Review Commission. There have been too many changes. There has been not enough of work done by some neighborhood councils, and others have moved forward. We need to look at the system and see whether they are adequately serving communities. The grievance system is appalling. It does not exist. How can you have a system where this is missing? How can you have a system where an ad hoc committee declares that there are no term limits? We need a better system serving communities. We want change, and we want the option to opt out our communities from the neighborhood council system. The decertification process must be there together with grievance, because many communities want to opt out. Echo Park is one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker I have is Lisa Sarkin. Do you want to speak, Lisa, on this matter? And Ms. Price, no.
And because these aren't as time sensitive as the election, they're only considered time sensitive.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That brings up our next speaker is Antonio Ramirez, followed by Glenn Bailey. Ms. Ramirez, you also have multiple cards, so if you'd like to speak longer than a minute,
Very
that's
much. I'd like to speak on item number 2, if I may. Question, would that include public comments, or would that be a separate?
I'm going to do public comment separately, but you have three cards on
Yes.
items, so if you want to speak to all of those items together or separately, it's up to you.
Thank you. Item number 2, in reference to the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, I would hope that council members Krikorian and Smith would give credit to where credit is rightfully due, and I'm saying that politely. Thus, gentlemen, you forgot one vital and crucial element, and I'm referring to the sheriffs and LA Police Department kick-ass chopper pilots who are tangible and tenacious law enforcers and are necessary tool for the public safety and peaceful, quiet enjoyment of habitability for Los Angeles law-abiding citizens. Moreover, case in point, for those of us who were in the LA City Hall proximity and had visual view of the 99% protesters before and after midnight last night, the LAPD chopper pilots gave a substantively high performance and intricately highly coordinated maneuvers throughout the night, and still giving a brilliant aerial survey performance after 3 o'clock in the morning. For you see, I was awake and watching all the spectacular fireworks being performed by the 99% protesters, the foot patrol officers, the LAPD and SWAT vehicles, the barricade setups, the media frenzy along in all extraneous non-participating protesters. These chopper pilot heroes, who are miraculously skilled in all areas of law enforcement and aviation, assisted the LAPD foot patrol officers and all law enforcement vehicles, including the SWAT teams. And let me go now to number 4. Relative to a neighborhood regional governance system, I implore you to give high priority to utilizing the necessary and vital tool of neighborhood council, and that is our desperately needed LAPD chopper pilots in unison with county emergency crew chopper pilots to set a high standard of health, welfare, and public safety in all services for their acute and high-performance aerial and rescue missions. LA should now provide these chopper pilots with the following: that being effective on January the 1st, 2012, a pay raise, a 2-week paid vacation with all expenses paid, a revised and full comprehensive medical, dental, vision, and life insurance with all in- and outpatient services, inclusive a full body and butt massage to avoid heart and leg thrombosis, a full acupuncture treatments and group healings and therapy meetings, as well as travel to aviation and law enforcement and military protection, safety, and rescue techniques in case of the big one when it hits. Lastly, on a structural enhancement, we must repair, upgrade the chopper launching pads, more lighting, better signage, and more high-tech towers and landing pads for better lifting and touchdowns. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Glenn Bailey, and I think that's all I have on number 2. And then, okay, Mr. Bailey, and again, you have multiple cards to take. Up 4 minutes if you need.
Thank you very much. I know you'll be hearing more and more detail on these from various sources, and so appreciate your listening to that. I just want to make a few general comments. First of all, I did participate in 2 of the working groups, or task force, working groups, I guess, for this round, that's what that was called, on the funding and also the grievance governance issues. I first want to state my appreciation to the General Manager, Mr. Kim, and his staff, particularly Gracie Liu, who spent time, many evenings, weekends, coming to the holding meetings and also coming to the neighborhood council sessions for outreach. That's, helpful in the dialogue process. A couple of comments regarding training. We have an ethics requirement, all public officials do, and we've been told that, that was going to be enforced. We were told that earlier this year, that there would be, I think even Bonk voted on it, that if you didn't take the ethics training, that there were going to be some consequences to that. That still hasn't been forthcoming, and it's now near the end of the year. And also, it's even hard to get an updated list of who's taken the ethics training so we can maybe enforce it by peer pressure. And so, I think that I'd like to see as part of this, just on that alone, consequences and it publicly known who has not taken ethics in every 2-year requirement, so that their fellow board members or the stakeholders will be able to pressure them on that. Regarding governance, I think you are intimately aware of the role that the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils plays in the Valley. There are similar alliances in many other parts of the city. My only comment that I wanted to urge the department, really, and I guess all neighborhood council folks, is for those areas where we don't have alliances, that we really make a concerted effort to create that, because I think it really helps us all. It helps not just Dunn, but it helps many other departments. When they want to come and reach neighborhood councils, they can do one-stop shopping by coming to the alliance and get the word out that way. So it's a minority of the city in area and population, I believe, that still doesn't have that. But I think it's a good, given limited resources done, it'd be a good place to strategically focus some effort. And I'll leave. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. That brings us to cards on item number 3. And is Mr. Gelfin still here? Yeah. Robert Gelfin? Oh, there he is. It's on grievance. And then following, yes, it's on this on the grievance system. Following Mr. Gelfin will be Charles Lindenblatt.
Okay. It has to be quick, so consider all the nice, proper stuff said. I wrote 2 articles for City Watch. One started out, and I must say I didn't write the word warning in all capital letters. Some editor put that on, and I did not say put the councilman's picture on it. Some editor did that, so I wanted to make that clear. Nothing personal. When I looked at the original version of the grievance process, it struck me that there's some dangerous stuff here. Creating an ad hoc grievance council of non-judges, non-lawyers, non-anybody who could, pound the hammer on a neighborhood council and abolish a board or something, struck me as not where you want to go, and I think it's very consistent with what you've said about democracy and so on. The next meeting, which was I think the last meeting that I attended, went a long ways to fixing a lot of that stuff. I will point out that, to be blunt, there really isn't all that much use for having a grievance system anyway. We've gone on 10 years with, you'll hear the same complaints, and as the city attorney pointed out to the people, the last 10 minutes of the last meeting, you don't really have to have a grievance process. But if you want to do it, it's a way for people to vent their issues to a sympathetic ear, and in the case of extremely serious issues, which would be decertification issues anyway. It's a way for Dunn to become involved and be made aware, even though they usually are aware anyway. And the last thing I would say is that I think that there's got to be a difference between the sort of issues where Dunn comes in and starts doing what they call exhaustive efforts and decertification versus the usual somebody said something rude to me and I don't like it kind of thing. I think that what they've come up with is vague enough to be more or less safe.
Thank you. Our final speaker on item 3 is Charles Lindenbutt.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Charles Lindenblatt, Mid-City West Community Council. Speaking for myself, I was former chair of Bylaws Grievance Committee for a number of years. I'm here basically, and I was also involved on the with Dunn's regional governance and grievance working group, and attended a number of meetings there. And I'm basically in favor of the plan that the working group came up with. I believe it's a great leap forward from the current system where neighborhood councils often ignore the grievances either on their own or in several cases because the city attorney basically says that we can't hear them. And so they're sort of out there, and there's a lot of concern about them that we can't handle them. And this way we'll give at least a chance for those items to be heard and dealt with, and that I like that there would be consequences involved for neighborhood councils that decide to bury the information, not hear it. We've had 6 or 7 different grievances that came through in the last couple of months that supposedly we're still waiting to hear back from the city attorney, but they're sort of bottled up, and that's inappropriate. And I would urge consideration of the plan developed by the Regional Governance and Grievance Working Group. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 4, and the only card I have is Jill Banks-Barad, but I don't see her. Is she still here? Jill? Do you want to speak on item 4? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Well then, the action of this committee on items 1, 2, 3, and 4 will be to continue each of them. Item 1 until our next meeting, and item 2, 3, 4, and in fact 5. We had no cards on, but item 5 will also be continued. Those latter 4 to a date still to be scheduled. Item 1 until our next committee meeting. And that will be the action of this committee for the moment. That brings us to general public comment. And is Dr. Williams? Dr. Williams? So our first speaker is Dr. Williams, you going to pass on public comment, or you got? All right. And in a very time-efficient way, which I appreciate. Thank you. See you next time. That brings us next to Ida Talala. Is Ms. Talala still here? And next speaker would be Antonio Ramirez, followed by Robert Gelfin.
Again, thank you very much. And again, I was mesmerized and completely taken aback, breathtaken by these wonderful, skilled, and precise pilots with maneuvers that were so detailed, and they handing instructions about the unfolding developments of the City Hall eviction mandate upon all 99%ers protesters from the City Hall blighted lawns and surrounding degrading filth. The LAPD chopper pilots and other law enforcement chopper pilots had exceptionally coordinated and implemented said policies for their chopper pilot positionings, i.e. some chopper pilots were stationed in one fixed position within the 4 City Hall quadrant areas, and other choppers roamed back and forth with high beam aerial surveillance, while other chopper pilots flew at high and low altitudes, scoping the potentially dangerous pockets of violent melee breakouts. Bless these gifted and raw talented pilots, because they were still up well after 3 o'clock in the morning. Furthermore, having assisted in a peaceful arrest and crowd dispersing. And again, I am so grateful. And the LA City Hall, you must give them credit where credit is due. You should have seen what they did all night long. Bless their hearts. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Final speaker to close it out, bring us home, Robert Gelfin. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that comment very much. All right, with that, thank you all for attending, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.